Police Canine Radio. I'm Greg Tawney, with me Rich Hartman. Rich, what's going on?
We are on episode number 3 of the Hold the Line conference. We're here and we got Mike squared, Mike cubed, Mike to the second power. I don't know what we're doing.
I like that.
We got mics, and we've had both mics on the podcast before, and I feel like we don't even need to introduce them, but we'll do it. We got Mike Nezbeth.
Hi.
Over there with the hair.
The pretty one.
There you go. And Mike Lilly next to me with the hat on backwards.
The better one.
And we're really just going to roundtable today. I mean, kind of our goal is just to chat about shit that we're seeing that's going on out there. We've been to both your classes. Actually, it was cool. Nezbeth, we're going to call you the keynote. You and Carlos had the keynote class.
Yeah.
So everybody showed up and as a requirement, because admins were getting mad that there was no instruction on day one, they added you guys in as the intro and instructional.
That's what I said. Like, oh man, there's a lot of people in your class on day one. I was like, well, they didn't really have any other choice.
That's the way to do it.
Set the bar.
And Mike, you had your tracking class today?
Yes.
We'll start with that since we didn't see that one. We were bouncing around. How did the tracking class go? And I'm guessing it was all inside. You didn't actually go outside.
Yeah, that's the downside is the 2-hour block. Trying to shove all that into that 2 hours is difficult, but good turnout, lots of questions. I really try to harp on, like, ask questions, and you got to walk out of here with an understanding of is this tool in your toolbox to go back home with.
So we were talking about it on the last podcast. Jerry Bradshaw had a dog for sale the other day, and he referred to it as a West Coast dog because it had everything but tracking. And we love tracking. We think tracking's a necessary thing, but admittedly on the West Coast we do less tracking than everybody else.
Yeah.
And we already talked about the reason why that is, and it's mainly because we have gridded areas and it's easier to set a perimeter, and every backyard in California has a 6-foot fence.
Yeah.
So it kind of
paid our bills down there. So.
Yeah, it was kind of a pain in the ass, right?
Yeah.
But we also have a shitload of rural areas where I would say it's necessary. I think one of Greg's favorite apprehensions that he had was from a track. So
absolutely.
So tracking is valuable to us.
Yeah, you don't bite them if you can't find them.
That's right. Yep.
But we, for whatever reason, I guess culturally on the West Coast, tracking seems to lack a little bit. But we like it. We value it. It's been one of those things that's fallen off the side.
You talk to Gooseby, and he's like, not doing it.
Well, and that's a whole different story, and we'll touch briefly on LAPD. The rest of California is not LAPD.
Yes.
We're not saying anything bad against LAPD right now because we're rolling. No, we're not saying anything bad, but the reality is at LAPD, when you ask for something, you get it. You get fucking airships, you get perimeter, you get less lethal. Like, it's not uncommon to have a dozen people at a call.
Yeah.
We have agencies that don't have a dozen people on the roster.
Oh, yeah. We have times where I'm lucky to have a new guy with a flashlight holding a perimeter on tracking. So
Yeah, you just run around the outside really fast, make them think there's a lot of you.
Make it look like there's 4 of you.
So we'll hit tracking quickly. When you get questions or you get problem solving, what's the biggest thing that you're seeing in tracking that people are having a hard time with?
It's always, I can't get him to slow down. How do I get the dog to slow down? He's dragging me everywhere, his head's up. And most of the time, the first things that I'm going to is to suggest is removing all these things that we incite all these unwanted behaviors. Toys on the track, bites on, a decoy standing behind a tree in a full suit at the end of a track. Like, that's going to get the dog dragging you everywhere. So my rule of thumb for most handlers is you're not going to slow the dog down by just trying to pressure him into it. The work has to become so difficult, and the way we pay them must be more regimented and more clear to the dog to get him to slow down. So I don't want anything on the track whatsoever. No toys, no food, no articles, because all of those things are going to elicit speed, where I just want to be able to mark and pay as they go. And that seems to be pretty much the consistent complaint.
Is there still a belief from some of your peers in the tracking world that there has to be a man involved for it to be real live tracking training?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that stuff's still going on, and they've got their way, I've got mine, and there's no way to get them to slow down when you've got guys standing at the end of the track where the dog can be really wrong and do a whole lot of bad stuff the whole track and still win.
And win that at the end.
Like, when you say track, for all these tracks that you're doing, you start that contract with the dog and you've built it to say, I'll do really bad behavior, be really shitty, and I still get to win.
we were talking about just as it starts with dogs in general, if we start with a toy, we're going to get a whole lot less reps than we are with food.
Right.
And we still fight that same battle with people not thinking that we can train dogs with food. I think we're getting past it.
Yeah.
We bitch about it enough that I think people are either getting tired of hearing it. But I think for you guys, and Mike Nezbeth, you were talking about it in your class too, there's some value to slowing shit down and letting the dog understand that, like, hey, man, I'm here to work with you.
Yep.
And if I start with a toy, or in your case, if you're tracking and you start with a man, then I have to kick the dog's ass to make him work for me. Yep. And if I have to start with conflict, then there's a problem, right?
Yeah, you're just building on it, right?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that on your end? Because I know you're doing, obviously, most of the decoy work, and you're seeing a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think, there's kind of like a common thread in, like, we get to travel quite a bit and work with a lot of dogs, different profiles, different disciplines. But the common thread is, like, a lot of times we select these dogs that are just easily over-aroused, and they've been built up their whole life to just go crazy. You see a ball, lose your mind. You get to a building, scream your head off. You do bite work, it's chaos. You track, you sprint to the end of the track. So it's actually a saying that I've stolen from Mike Lilly, but I was like, what the dogs need now is church music, right? Things need to slow down. When we're working on our obedience behaviors, let's be able to get some deliberate reps in. When we're working on some of our grips, some of our bite work, it doesn't need to be chaotic. We need to have kind of slow, methodical, systematic approaches to these things so that those reps that we get in actually have meaning, and the dogs are able to retain what's happening.
Right.
So Greg and I were talking about that. A lot of that comes down to what, at least historically, agencies have thought they wanted in a dog.
Right.
So I would say for the European vendor that's trying to sell a dog, and they say, hey, we have this fucking wild-ass Marlin on the end of the leash, and the agency's like, fuck yeah, that's what I want. I want that.
Yeah.
And energy doesn't equal drive, right?
Yeah,
like chaos doesn't mean that it's going to transfer over into workability. But are you seeing that in selection? Both you guys can answer this. Are you seeing that in selection where maybe agencies are looking for the wrong thing because it looks sexy?
For sure, absolutely. We've been places where guys will come to the tracking station, and I'm talking about food and clarity, and guys will be like, no, man, if a dog will take food at testing, we don't want them. Like, we don't even want to look at it.
Yeah, no, it's
And
literally.
I'm like, holy crap.
Can you give them our number? Because I'll take that dog.
Yeah, and that's what I tell him. I will put a dog on a bite and bring a bowl of food up, and if he'll let that go to take that, we can work on the other stuff later. This just tells me that I can function with a clear brain. Like, I'm working with an animal that can actually think straight.
Do you guys see that? I guess, industry wide, that maybe in the selection process they're looking for the wrong thing?
I think for so long it has been like the fallacy has been like energy expenditure is drive, right? Seeing a dog that's just super energetic and aroused and knocking things over is like, wow, look how drivey that dog is. I think a lot of times vendors, European vendors here, they're also prepping dogs to look that way, right? So because that's what people have been buying or what people have been attracted to. So they say, well, we're going to prep the dogs for the selection testing, but not actually prep the dogs to be police dogs.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thing we always talk about in Nookshook, talk about how good the food is and all that, but I think sometimes we forget to let people know where they can get it. The Nookshook's pretty cool. If you're an agency and you have a lot of dogs, you can order a pallet directly to your agency, and we have several agencies that are doing that. If you're a small agency and you only have 1 or 2 dogs, you can order a Nookshook directly off Chewy. So just wanted to put that information out there. If you have access to Chewy, Chewy can deliver that dog food directly to your front door.
Our next sponsor, Ray Allen. They have become an official sponsor of Police K-9 Radio, and it wasn't by accident. We actually sought them out because of the quality of their equipment. Matter of fact, all of our handlers in our basic handler class, we're now referring to Ray Allen. There's a one-stop shop for their harnesses, which we love. Nylon lines, gloves, leather lines, breaker bar, e-collar, the Rec Specs, Hearing Dog Pro we get from them. The Tritronics holster, because we recommend the Garmin is what we have all our handlers running with. They come with that tactical holster. So you can get everything there, one-stop shop, rayallen.com.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've gotten to the point where in testing, like what we're explaining is like an external dog. They manifest their energy outward, right? They're barking, they're animated. And if I've got that dog and I've got another dog that's just sitting there and focused, man, I'll take that focused dog. You can have that barking dog all day long because we'll be fighting that external drive just throughout its career of its barking here, it's barking there, it's barking during announcements, it's barking in the car. It's a pain in the ass. I mean, I've gotten to the point where some of these external dogs, I'd rather just pass on. If they're good and everything, but they are just, everything is barking, and just jumping around, and they cannot sit still. That's a lifelong battle.
That's right.
It's a management issue. It's like you can't correct it per se.
And I'm just like, hey, you can get a dog that actually, if it's done right and it's the right dog. To me, those dogs that are, I guess you would probably call them internal dogs, bro, their performance in all the other tasks tend to be better. They tend to be more efficient with their energy. So on top of the loud ones just being annoying, and usually we could teach that internal type dog, if we need them to be vocal, we can teach them to be vocal at times. We can teach you to turn on and to turn off.
And on, like we talked about it at the at Jim O'Brien's station this morning, me and Rich talked about it. I think one of the biggest issues is handlers always come out and the dog goes in, bites, does detection, tracks, goes to the car, comes out, bites, does whatever, goes to the car. And just getting them to come out and just chill and then go to the car, and come out and chill, go to the car, that's worth 100-fold of coming in and doing some bullshit bite reps and then doing shit and going to the car. Like, I would much rather see half a day spent of a handler just going to different places and different calls that he's not needed on, and just letting the dog experience it and not be a douchebag the whole time. And that, just getting that clear brain will help tremendously.
Yeah, I think something also to add on to what you're saying, like, it's like for the regular, training days, where a lot of times we go places like, okay, well, here's our training day. For the morning, we're going to work on obedience.
Right.
And then afternoon, we're going to do some detection, and then maybe we're going to do some building searches or whatever. And I was like, okay, why don't we just put a scenario together where obedience is a part of the scenario, and maybe there's some detection that's a part of the scenario, and then there's so then we can, instead of having like these
compartmentalized,
it all broken down, like these are dogs that are on the road, they should be able to get out. I'm a big fan of if you're doing building searches or whatever you're working on, let's have some dogs on deck sitting, waiting with their handler. And if one of them is too excited to get into the building, guess what? You're going to stay out and someone's going to skip you in line. So I think building those kind of things in also can help with some of those dogs that are just over-aroused.
Both of you guys have talked about it, and Jim talked about it. Greg talks about it all the time. Simple things, well, at least what we start to think are simple things, like the marker. It seems like it's still lost on a good portion of the handler population out there. What are we doing wrong as a training industry where people aren't getting that? Like, we had to start editing ourselves and kind of censoring ourselves from saying the word marker because it started to get dumb. And actually, when Greg was doing the podcast before I got on,
maker's marker.
I texted him and I'm like, dude, I'm making a fucking drinking game out of this. Every time you say marker, I'm taking a shot, and I was shit-faced 15 minutes into it, right? But it was like, bro, quit saying marker. Like, you sound like and then now the problem is
we stopped saying it for a year, and then like, no, nobody's talking about markers. At least, it's not in the vernacular with new handlers. It seems like maybe I think markers started making its debut and people got it, and then those handlers moved on, and for whatever reason, I don't know. Are you guys seeing that industry wide, or is that nationwide? Because you guys travel all over.
Well, and three of us are pet dog trainers, and you've dealt with enough of raising. Like, we know how valuable the marker is to us, and I feel like we've preached it. But can you guys talk about, like, the lack of basic understanding of foundational work with dogs and where it's fucking dogs up?
And I think the really toxic side of it is, especially agency wide, is my experience is you've got a guy that got selected to be the trainer. He was the trainer for this long. Well, he's just taking what was passed down from him. And I think that's where it started, because markers weren't a thing then. And when they were talked about, it was, oh, no, that's for puppies. This isn't for our working dogs. And that just gets passed trainer to trainer to trainer.
Same with food, probably.
Same with food. And so that's what was beat into my brain. And my argument is always, I come from that. I come from being told this is bad. So I come from where you're saying this, but you've never tried markers. You've never tried food. You're just taking what a trainer told you and you're pushing it along to your guys. No fault of that guy, but be open to, there's more stuff out there. And my go-to is always, yeah, back then that was fine, but you also didn't have 24-hour dispatch. You also were wearing a revolver with a speed loader. I mean, everything else has evolved. Let's evolve the training as well.
Yeah, you're not writing a report with a pencil and driving a Dodge Diplomat anymore. You can probably say yes, right?
Exactly.
Or
Exactly. There's some other stuff out there.
Yeah, I think those. Sorry, I think that part of it is like because we understand the value in markers, and we try to push it for quite some time. And not that we're the first ones or the last ones to try and do this, but just it was big talking points. But at some point, at least for me, I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm just being redundant.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. So then it kind of failed. I'm like, okay, well, I feel like the value is there, right? And people get it. And then so maybe we stop talking about that so much, and then you see like another wave, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen the same thing, and it's like, oh no, like we need to mark this behavior. I think some of the challenges that we run into is kind of like this conference is amazing, right? But we have such limited time with these guys that we see, so it's like, okay, if we can maximize our time, like what is going to give these handlers the biggest return on investment,
right?
And sometimes depending on what we're working on, though that marker conversation may not be the priority number one.
Right.
We may have bigger issues to deal with or other things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's like we're coming into it thinking we've got to get them to understand how valuable marker is, how valuable this is, but they can't even get the leash on the dog because the dog's nuking the handler in the car. Like there's so many other bigger things out there, but I think it's just passed down and hopefully one day those guys will cycle out. But I think also the other big issue is that as cops, I've done it where we've all done it. We can't be wrong. Like it's got to be this way, and there's no other way. And he says it a lot. None of the things that we teach are we married to. Like what I taught in my PowerPoint last year at this conference is different from what I taught this year at this conference because it has to be ever evolving because are you fighting for it so hard when you haven't done anything else, so you don't know whether what he's told you is right or wrong. I come from I was told that markers and food are bad to that's complete bullshit. That is incorrect, and markers and food are the path to success. So just stop hanging on to it. Just because you were taught it doesn't mean you invented it and you own it. And why are you getting so mad when somebody says, hey, try this?
And we're not dumb, right? We all use compulsion.
Right.
I mean, it's not the end all. We're not walking around with 2 pounds of food to get everything done.
Exactly.
Sometimes a dog needs to be corrected, right? I mean, I guess on the pet side, we're balanced, but also on the police side, we're balanced.
There's got to be accountability. They have to have it.
I think ultimately, like one of the things that make it easy for me to digest is I just look at people that are doing something that I want to be able to do and are doing it better and more efficiently and turning these dogs around consistently. And I say, hey, how are you doing that? And so far, everyone that I've been able to talk to, kind of in all of the profiles, has been using some elements of marker training, some elements of using food. So, well, I'm going to do that. Now, if there's someone else that I come across and they're performing at a higher level with the dogs and something that I want to achieve and they're not using, I'm not married to it. This is just what I know as of right now and the information that I have this has been pushing things in the right direction.
Mike Nezbeth, while you're still talking about that, did you start off? I know Greg, I know Michael and myself, we all started off heavy compulsion. That was just what we were taught. We went out, we were told to yank and crank. Matter of fact, I got kicked off of a training field at a large training facility in Southern California because I brought a toy out with me.
No.
I got kicked off the field and told, don't bring it out here. I don't want the other dogs seeing that toy. You're going to fuck up training. Like, it's an old story. I'm sure we've all heard. But did you start with all compulsion when you started?
Basically, I not the exact same story as you guys, but I started kind of with pet dog things. So there was still some food based there. But as soon as I moved over to working dog stuff, I joined like a French ring club in South Florida, and it was, bro, why do you have food out? Why is there a toy here? We're using now that I didn't know what I didn't know, but now that I'm looking back on it, like very high levels of compulsion on very young dogs that don't even know what the behavior is that they should be doing to hopefully get them to understand things. So I was right there joining in, making fun of people, training with food, because like, that's what I was doing.
When you guys travel with Canines United, and for those of you who don't know who Canines United is, you guys are pretty much out doing free work for agencies that need help or that don't need help. You guys came out Sacramento, but there's always a dog that needs help. You guys came out. You guys came out and worked with a lot of our guys out there, and we were able to get some good benefit. When you guys are traveling and you're seeing dogs that are having some problems, and you're able to work with the handlers and kind of get over some of those problems, or at least put them on the right path, are you finding that their agencies and their trainers are, once you guys leave and you pull out and they're like, hey, we've identified this problem, this is what we were kind of offered is to move forward to make this problem go away, are the agencies and the handlers and the trainers picking that up? Or it's like, yeah, those Canine United guys are gone now, get back in there and freaking kick that dog's ass?
I feel like it's probably a 50-50. We get feedback and, hey, this is what I've done, how do I move forward, from handlers a lot after seminars. But then we'll follow up with like some of our problem child kids at the seminar, and they're like, no, I gave up on it. I'd spent a week with it and just got fed up with it. Yeah. So I think it all depends on the actual handler. And because even handlers, all you guys know, handlers that are told by a trainer, you can only do this, but if they truthfully want to be better, they'll go find a way to be better, and they're going to do it. So it's on them.
I was going to say, yeah, but when we go, I agree, probably about 50-50, but I also, like, even with those limited days that we have with everyone, like, I don't think that we're going to change a whole system of training, change a whole dog program. So I still think even if we're 50-50 and the guys can take one thing home that makes things a little bit easier for them, or the dog's a little bit more reliable or efficient at their job, then it's worth it. You know?
And you plant that seed, right? Hey, there's another way to go maybe than what you've been told, and maybe investigate some of these other ways.
And that's why we like our push now is to try to do less seminars, but try to get agencies and units on board with like adding a training coordinator position so that we can affect long-term change. We can come for a 3, 4, 5 day seminar and do a lot. But imagine us coming regularly and doing maintenance training a week long for quarterly maintenance to really make sure everybody's staying on the right path. So that's what we're trying to transition to with agencies, and hopefully it works out. But I feel like we're going to provide more change doing that than we are coming in for a seminar and just barely cracking Pandora's box and then shutting it and leaving.
Do either one of you guys offer any online training?
No.
He does. I have an online decoy course, like pre-recorded course. I do offer some online sessions,
but you don't have like a this is our program. I was going to say use a DVD, but now
what's a DVD?
Yeah, we can stream some stuff. I know, but you guys don't offer any.
So actually, I do have a Patreon as well. So what we try to do on the Patreon is obviously, people are sometimes limited by just geography and where they're at. So I try and I have Mike on there talking about some of his tracking stuff and ways that they can keep up with their tracking. We have Brady on there talking about some of the medical things or dog handling, obviously some decoy stuff. So I try and put in on the Patreon, maybe not for the agencies, but like a police puppy prospect plan from 8 weeks to 6 months old, like those kind of resources out there and available.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason why I was asking is I know you guys all know who Michael Lillis is, and my thought is there's a lot of people out there, they hear the marker word and then they go talk to somebody and then, it's a dirty word and don't talk about it. And then they're like, well, fuck, what do I do?
Right.
Michael Ellis always has a ton of online information. Now he has a thing. I think he just did a marker class that was, I think it's like $45 or something like that.
Yeah.
For $45. And I mean, once you get past the long hair and the tie-dyed shirt and the fact that he trains dogs.
That's the look I'm going for.
And he trains dogs in Crocs, right? Like once you get past that and the fact that he lives in the Bay Area, California, and you're like, all right, like the dude knows what he's talking about, and he's putting information out there that is pretty easily digestible.
Yeah.
We don't work with Mike. We don't get any money from, but that's where I started my training path, is like, dude, I'm tired of beating this dog up. Like, and I think I look at it as parenting, right? Like when I was being raised, my parents were pretty heavy handed. It was just like, hey, you fucking do it or you're going to get your ass kicked. When they were getting raised, it was extremely heavy handed, right? Yeah. And then I raised my kids and I'm like, I'm going to be a little less of that, and I'm going to offer a little more reward. And then you look and you're like, my kids seem a little more balanced than me. Right. Like, and then it gets worse, right? Then you go down the line, and maybe they lean too hard with their kids. Right. Now they're like, is all they're doing is reward and everything.
Right.
So then you're like, all right, it doesn't work to throw a ton of reward out there. It doesn't work to just kick everybody's ass. Maybe there's something in the middle. And if it works for humans, right? Like, if you do a good job, you know what we'll do? We'll promote you. We'll give you a better paycheck. We'll give you an assignment in the department. We'll make you a detective. Yep. So if it works for us, if we're doing well and somebody gives us a little pat on the ass, and if we're fucking up and don't show up to work and somebody's like, hey, if you don't show up to work again, we're going to fire you. You're going to dock your pay. You're going to have days off. Yep. If it works for humans, why can't it work for something as simple as a dog?
That's right. And I'm a firm believer in you can get a lot out of a dog and never have to put your hands on them. And I come from, that's what I was taught. And I really firmly believe that we can get really good stuff and never have to touch them, never have to put our hands on them.
Yep. Mike Nezbeth, I'm going to ask you a question about drive channeling, and it's going to be a little.
We're going to the mailbag.
Going to the mailbag. We got a request today, and it's actually by one of my employees on the pet side who is a dog nerd. She said, ask Mike about prey versus defense, how to transition between two, especially if the dog is very strong and stuck in one, the pros and cons of working in only one or the other, and what age should you start worrying about channeling those drives?
Yeah, that was a long question.
It is a long question.
Yep.
So I think we have to have kind of some maybe working definitions of prey and defense. So to me, from the literature that I've been able to read, prey is a dog or an animal exhibiting drives that are chase, search, kill, consume, and probably something else, right? And then defensive drives or defensive behaviors are a dog being in the presence of a threat or the perceived presence of a threat, right? To me, I think both of those drives are very important for dogs to be familiar with. And if we wait too long, and let's say we have a very prey-dominant dog, and we wait too long and they've only ever been familiar with prey behaviors, but by the time that we show them what a defensive feeling feels like, they may not know how to overcome it. Right? They may have not built or developed the ability to have resilience and know what the answer is. Kind of like us, right? If kids are just raised in a bubble and they never had any stress in their life, then that can be a problem when you introduce the smallest piece of stress to them. That being said, a lot of defense work on a really young puppy is also like having a kid that has been exposed to very high levels of stress, and generally that doesn't work out for humans either, right? So we want to figure out a way that we can show them what a little bit of defensive pressure is like as a young dog, but also make sure that they have the tools to deal with that. And defensive pressure can change a lot from dog to dog. The general safest way, in my opinion, is I like to, if we're working with a dog, maybe let's say it's even a young dog, 3, 4, 5 months old, and they're biting some equipment. We're working predominantly in prey. Maybe I slip that equipment to them. They take it. We lift them off or whatever. They put it down. I let them also display a little bit of defensive behavior guarding the equipment on the floor. So as the decoy, I kind of stalk over the equipment. All my intentions are over the equipment and not at the dog, because at the dog is a little bit too confrontational, in my opinion, for a puppy that young. Right. But I want them to show me some displays of, no, that's my resource, get away from it. So I introduce it kind of in that way. I also think when we do, when I'm using negative reinforcement and I touch a puppy on its tail, it's probably a little bit uncomfortable for them, right? I'm not yanking the puppy and carrying them around, but I touch them on their tail while they're biting something. They probably feel a bit of vulnerability there. But as soon as they give me what my desired behavior is, I let go, and I'm really early on starting to teach them how to deal with that.
So you're developing the thought that you're an adversary early on, but doing it in kind of a non-confrontational way.
Yeah, I'm an adversary, but I'm not an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
I want them
competitor.
Yeah, I'm a competitor. We're
like a kid's jiu-jitsu class or a kid's karate class, right?
Exactly.
Like you punch me, or like I get a little kid puts me in a triangle and I tap out and they're like, ooh.
I did exactly that, man. with our kids, I'll play fight with my kids all the time, and I put them in a spot where they're feeling uncomfortable and awkward, and then I let them fight their way out of it, and like, oh, I got you, Dad, and it's like kind of builds them up as well. It's exact same thing with the puppies. Defense is vulnerable though, right? Like we have to acknowledge that, and if we wait again too long to introduce them to that, it can be very scary for them.
And you talked about it in your class the other day, and I think it's a good thing to remember. A clatter stick can put a dog in defense, or it can be something that just becomes part of their upbringing, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you introduce a clatter stick to a dog at 2 weeks old, and every time they eat, you get a little clatter, if you show them that at 6 months old and you bring out the clatter stick, you're not putting that dog in defense.
Oh man, I have a story when I first got it. I was like, I'm gonna do police dog decoying, and you know what? Police, they got guns, so we got puppies out, and I had a little blank 22, and every time we did bite work, I'm shooting the gun off. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't care. Look at this. And then I tried to sell the dogs when they were older, and you can imagine what happens when they hear gunfire, right? So for some dogs, that would be super intimidating. But for these puppies that I raised up doing, and I'm not recommending anyone do that, I should clarify, we just condition that to be a state of arousal, time to bite when they hear it, right?
Well, and it looks cool like in KMPV, and no knock on KMPV. It's a fun sport to watch. We've gotten some really good dogs from KMPV. But if you take your KMPV dog to the range, stand the fuck by, right? Like, and if you don't get that cleared up, dog's going after your gun hand, which is a problem.
Yeah.
Like you bring the gun out, you start firing, and then dog's like, hey, when I hear gunfire, we fight shit, right?
Yeah.
And now it's looking at you, and now there's a little bit of conflict, and I'm trying to kick its ass and hold my gun, Obviously, there's ways around that, but it's where that problem develops. It's no longer pressure. Now it's just fun.
Yeah, it's just something else now.
Yeah.
And you know what, to tie this whole thing together with markers, real quick to the handlers out there, I have separated the draw from the shoot because we were getting handlers that had problems. They would draw and shoot, draw and shoot, and draw and shoot. And what are we doing? With the draw is now, the precursor to shooting. So if you have a dog that gets excited by the loud noise, which it's natural for them to get excited by the noise, right? And you're going draw, shoot. Now you're just doing a draw, and the dog is kicking in drive, and we separate it. So we do a ton of drawing, you handlers out there, do a ton of drawing, no shoot. Teach the dog that's nothing for them to be concerned with, and you're using markers properly. Just because you pull something out quickly, they're not going to bite it because you didn't mark it. So that's where the markers come in. But also make sure that draw doesn't become the marker for the shooting. So we draw nothing, and then when we do shoot, there's no draw to it. It's just we have the gun out there, and then we introduce the gunfire separate from the draw so you don't have that problem. Because if you guys are having issues where you're drawing your gun and your dog wants to eat you, you have created that. That is not in nature. We have done it too many times.
Yeah. I talked actually in my class this morning, it was about problem solving, and I talk about, a lot of the problems that we have are things like that we've unintentionally classically conditioned. Yep. And then we try and punish the dog for it. But it's a reflexive response that they don't know what they're being punished for because we've made them do it, essentially.
Yes.
I'm going to have you guys each give an example. So, Mike Nezbeth, give me an example of something that a handler, I will even say a pet owner, classically conditioned their dog to do that was unintentional, that is damn near unerasable.
Well, I'll say police handler, canine announcements at door thresholds. We go, make canine announcements. The dogs get to run in the building after that and do the most thrilling thing in the world for them. And so many reps, especially with these schools that are much shorter, you just have to do it. People are running them through, and then we get there. Now we're like, hey, this dog won't shut up when I want him to shut up. Yeah. We've built in that anticipatory behavior, and it's classically conditioned now. So I think that's a good example.
Solution to that.
A solution to that is we have to, I call it violating the contract. So kind of like what you said with the drawing of the gun. Like we have to first get him out of the car and slowly use proximity to that building and violate that contract. You think we're going to go in here and do some fun gangster shit. Yeah. No, we're going to just hang out. And that alone won't solve the problem, but it will get them to the point of it not being classically conditioned. So the dog starts looking back. Wait a minute.
Is this
are you
one of those
bullshitting
times?
me again? And once we have you there, then I can start operantly dealing with that behavior. I can start punishing, and I can, because you're here with me now. You're mentally here with me.
We do something similar where I tell guys, like, if your dog's nutting up at the door, you're working all night long. I guarantee you're not busy on a 10-hour shift.
There's 10,000 doors.
Yeah, go to 20 doors a night, walk up to it, make an announcement, and lay down. Make an announcement, lay down. Like I promise you, when it's time to search, if your selection process was halfway decent, your dog's going to figure it out and they're going to go in there. It's not like you're going to lose the drive. That goes back to selection early on. Just because they're wild at the end of the leash doesn't mean that they're going to do the job. And just because they're quiet at the end of the leash doesn't mean that they're not going to do the job. Michael Lee, another one that an unintended classical condition. And that maybe
I think that in a lot of traditional tracking methods, that track command can become a real dirty word, like the race word, race jump off and just take off the race at the start by giving that track command, because some of the runoffs and bites at the end, things like that mean, the reward is not going to be right at the start, so let's hurry up and get closer to the start. So, and then we give that track command at the same time, and now the dog is just off to the races. So that's one big one we see a lot. Another one in detection is a lot of guys inadvertently, they want dogs to get close to odor, but then they're paying with no marker and they're throwing a Kong or a tennis ball, and they want the dog to source odor, but then they're making the dog go away from odor by throwing this bouncy ass toy up there. So the dog gets odor and then runs away from it, preparing for that bounce. And when you offer that, like, hey, this is why you're seeing that, they go, fuck, why didn't I think of that? And then you see handlers like, show me where it's at. Show me where it's at. And the dog's like, I ain't getting closer because I know that Kong's about to bounce 10 foot off of source. So
they've taken away the motivation for the dog to work.
To get any closer, exactly.
Like you're dangling the $100 bill over there. Why would I fuck around out there?
And those two are real common.
Greg, what are you seeing on some of those unintentional?
Well, actually, just in this conversation, can you guys define for the handlers? So we're talking about classical conditioning and the problem solving it takes to correct a behavior that has been classically conditioned versus, and Mike, like you use the term operant conditioning. Like, what does that mean to the handlers? Because so they're tracking the importance of you're attacking these two problems differently, right? Yeah. One that's been classically conditioned. Can you explain that and how you're attacking it versus just a behavior that's more of operant in nature?
Yeah. So a classically conditioned problem, to me, means that we've done something repetitive so many times that the dog has picked up on kind of that contractual agreement between whatever the cue is and what the outcome is. And now it's happened so many times that it's reflexive. So that means that the dog isn't even consciously making the choice to do the behavior. It just means that the behavior happens. Pavlov rings the bell, and then the dogs drool. Right, so that's happening, and we can't deal with those problems operantly. When I say operantly, I mean by consequences in our four quadrants. Like I can't just punish something there.
Sure, there's no thought behind it. He's just physiology's kicking in. He's just reacting. He hasn't made the thought process of I'm going to do this. Exactly. It's just something that's naturally leaking out.
So a lot of times they don't realize it. It's so that door threshold thing. Dogs barking at the door threshold. Numerous times I've seen it happen where the dog's losing his mind at the door threshold and the handler's getting frustrated with him and then starts to punish him a bit heavy, right? And the dogs, either it generally doesn't work or the dog just continues on with what he was doing, or some dogs, the handler says, the dog says, hey, you're not about to do that to me.
Yeah.
And then the handler ends up wearing the dog. But I really think that that's coming from it being classically conditioned and the dog actually not realizing what he's being punished for.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. When it's classically conditioned, we need to first remove it from that part of the brain, that reflexive part, and then once it's removed from there, then we can start dealing with it operantly, and operantly means by consequences, by outcomes.
Yep.
But they have to know what they're doing before we can treat them that way.
Yep. Yeah, and one of the, like I just dealt with an agency where the dog, big mouth, like gigantic, 120 pound mal, head like a mountain lion, would just come out and it's just everywhere. He's dragging the handler everywhere. He's overloading in a down. And he talked about what he could do to start trying to fix that. And I told him you can start by marking every time right before he overloads. Like you could almost time it. He had that build up. And then he would mark right before. And then we started talking about how we're going to add a consequence because there's going to be a time where that marking gets him understanding what he needs, but we need to have a consequence to say, okay, now when we give you that chance for it to start, we have to turn it off. So We're going to classically condition while he's quiet to say tap stem. At the same time, I'm going to say quiet. And then right after that, I'm going to say yes, and then pay the dog. So while he's quiet, I'm naming that just like I would name a sit, but I'm also layering very low level stem, hundreds of reps of tap stem with quiet, yes, and pay. And eventually he's going to be able to come up to that door, let him sit there till that moment that he starts to overload. And then at that time, he's going to have that word loaded with a consequence to say quiet, stops the behavior immediately.
There's going to be some confusion on that, so I'm going to ask you to clarify a little bit. In a lot of guys' minds, especially guys that are using the e-collar incorrectly, when you say tap stem and the dog's not doing anything wrong, people are like, well, what the fuck? Why am I stemming my dog if he hasn't done anything wrong? Can you clarify that part really quick so they're not tap stemming at a 127?
Yep, and I would say, exactly. And I would say, like, take away the mindset that you've had for so long of the e-collar's only corrective. Because most of the time when you're using the e-collar in the way you know, it's being done wrong. Like Mike's saying, the dog's overloading at the door, the handler starts pushing a button. The dog doesn't know that he has redlined and he's verbalizing. So when you start whacking stem, he's shoving himself farther into a down thinking that that's what it is. And then that's why you end up wearing the dog. So remove that mindset of it's a correction, and think in the levels that for the first couple days, we're on levels we're pretty convinced the dog isn't feeling. No more are the days, at least for me, are checking stem. Like, let him walk around the room and tap. I didn't see his ear wiggle. Higher, tap. If we're working on levels that we see them physically reacting to, I don't think they're thinking about what we're teaching. They're thinking about reacting or fighting that stem. So we need to go lower than that. So it's levels that we're just a tap with the word to add value to that. So it's not levels that we are anywhere around for outing and recalls and any of that stuff. This is just creating value to the word. Once we do a gazillion reps of that, then we can start going up into those levels where we say, okay, now when I say it and you don't do, now I have the ability to say, this is the consequence for that, and the dog will immediately, through clarity of task, know exactly what we're asking.
So I think and my very layman mind is we do this with kids all the time, right? In the beginning, we touch our kids, we communicate with them, and the only thing that we're doing with an infant is positive stuff, right? I don't think there's any reason that I can think of to slap an infant in the face and tell them to quit crying, right?
Hey, you didn't meet my kids,
Well, one of them.
So as an infant, I'm just touching them, I'm making it positive, but I'm communicating with them.
Right.
Something good comes from that.
Right.
As they become toddlers, then I might have to have a firm grip.
Right.
If at 15 that infant is now grown up and looks at mom and says fuck off and punches her in the stomach, well, I've earned the relationship now that you and I can have a really serious conversation with probably some force that's going to come from that, but it's still the same tactile touch, it's still the same, like we've earned that right. So in the beginning, you're just communicating, letting the dog understand, hey, we can communicate at this level, but later on when I need more from you or you've gone far to the right, I've earned that trust from you, and now I'm getting it back because we've played fair. Moving up there.
You have the ability eventually. I call it like an obligation phase of training, right? Like we're teaching, and then when the teaching is good and the dog's truly understanding the behavior, then we can move to obligation to behavior. But so often we jump to obligation to behavior before the dog truly understands what the behavior is.
There's no clarity of task there.
And that's where we were talking about this at the beginning before we even got on, talking about buying and selling dogs, getting dogs prepped to go out the door. When you're buying your dog from somebody, if they got it from overseas, and we'll pick on Eastern Europe because they're not going to come here and kick my ass right now. So we'll pick on Eastern Europe. There's not a lot of foundation that comes there that's useful to us. There's a lot of foundation that's there that's hectic, very possessive, strong, and without a lot of manners. I think we've all seen that Eastern European dog. So nobody's taught them that foundation where they can just communicate, right? So now the dog comes, we let it out of the box, it finds something that looks like a toy, we'll call it a shoe. And we're like, hey, let go of my fucking shoe. And the dog's like, I've been grabbing toys my whole life with no consequence. And I'm like, but you got to let go. Nope. Correction. The dog's like, you don't earn that. You've never had that relationship with me. How about I just fuck you up for correcting me? So then they never got that foundational support. Right. And if we do give that foundation to them, we're giving it to them at a year old, right? That's like teaching a 12-year-old kid, you know, how to be an adult.
Right.
You got to start at 3. You can't start at 12. So I think it all comes back to, you know, that full circle, the markers that we're talking about, rewarding, being balanced, all those things make it easier. We're about at the end of the podcast. This is why Greg and I, at the beginning of this podcast, we were laughing like, why do we do this? This is why we do it, because we get to sit with people and we get to nerd out on dog stuff, and they're fun conversations. But these are the tip of the iceberg. If you think anything about this is interesting at all, find people that you can have this conversation with. Go on Mike's Patreon. Go find somebody else. Look out there and see. It's 2024. Like, it's so easy to get information now, which sometimes is a detriment, but they're so easy to get information now. There's no reason to sit in your cave and not understand what markers are, not understand operant conditioning, not understand classical conditioning. Go out there and find it. And if you have a dog that you're running, not only is it something that like should be interesting to you, it should be your requirement to go out and figure out how that tool works. You know how to take your gun apart, right? Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a requirement to understand your equipment, and your dog is definitely your equipment, and there's a lot of moving parts to that thing.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So we really appreciate you guys coming on.
Real quick, how do we get a hold of you guys? How can our listeners find you? What are you doing?
You can start.
So to get a hold of me, you should probably contact my wife.
Smart man.
So her email for seminars and classes and dogs and stuff like that is going to be Suzy, SUZI, at MLK9.com. And that's the easiest way. Or you can hit us up on our social media pages, MLK9.com, Mike Lilly K9 on Instagram. You can find us pretty easy on there.
Yeah, mine's grassrootscanine.com. The emails and contact stuff is on there. And then we have a YouTube channel. It's Grassroots Canine. And the Patreon is just patreon.com/grassrootscanine.
What's your guys' next seminar? Mike, you got one coming up soon?
Idaho, I think, is the next one. And then after that, it's a blur. I go wherever she tells me to go. So wherever the flight is booked to, that's where I go.
I got Raleigh.
Raleigh.
Oh, yeah.
Soon? Is that coming up soon?
Yeah, leave from here and
just go straight there.
Yeah.
Right on. Thank you guys for coming on. I always love these talks. I mean,
we could go a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
cool.
We appreciate it.
In the meantime,
Train hard
and be safe.